All right, welcome students and film directors, Spike Lee, Film 360. Today's podcast is going to focus on how the midterm and the scene description and analysis went, which are the bulk of our grades thus far, in addition to class discussion. Midterm grades were due last week, so Self-Service Carolina has all of your course grades, as long as instructors submitted them. I certainly did. Did have an unusual situation, not totally surprising, but with the bulk of our work being the scene description analysis and the midterm, and those didn't go very well for some folks. There was about a third of the students did very well on both. Students who've either taken an introduction to film course with me before, or students who called me several times and we would have discussions and I would provide guidance as to how to prepare for the midterm and how to write the scene description analysis. Now, so for folks whose grade was not going to inspire them to do better, I just gave it an incomplete because I'm going to allow multiple revisions to the scene description analysis, and you'll have a couple of options with the midterm if your midterm grade is insufficient to our sense of what you should earn in the class. One, you can focus better on understanding the relationship between our course texts and class discussion and the films. And then you can take the final exam, and it'll be worth both the final exam proportion of your overall grade and the midterm proportion. If you prefer, I can create a second midterm with different but similar questions, and you can take that after fall break. So that's up to you. You don't have to decide as a cohort. But what I'm going to do now is go over first the midterm and then the scene description and analysis, then provide some instructions on how to revise your scene description analysis. So first up, most importantly with the exam, read the instructions. The exam features questions requiring answers of 2 to 3 sentences each and an essay question. The former questions will ask you to draw a connection between the reading and the viewing. You will have an hour and 50 minutes to complete the exam. You may make use of the book and the internet while taking the exam, but be sure not to plagiarize. I will score your best 6 of 7 shorter questions, so you may leave one blank. Let's begin. Question 1. What is David Sterritt's 3-part thesis regarding Spike Lee's films? How does that argument apply to Do the Right Thing? Well, as you know, as a 300-level, junior-level college student, the thesis is in the introduction. Now, if you're writing a 1-page in-class essay, that thesis is probably the first sentence. If you're writing a 5, 6, 7-page essay, that thesis is probably the last sentence of the first paragraph. If you're writing a 20-page senior seminar paper, that thesis might show up on page 3. In a book, that thesis shows up in the introduction, and it typically features language like, my primary argument in this book is threefold. And we have phrasing very much like that on page 8 of the introduction. So if you just kind of had a sense of what Sterritt's book is about and just kind of said race, criticism, review, that's not exactly what his thesis is. So you have to have read the book, ideally read it with a pen in hand and a computer, so you could look up words you don't understand, because I look up words I don't understand. And when you see a statement like the primary thesis of this book, or my primary argument is, you underline that. Also, when authors number things, first, second, third, they're clarifying their position and they're identifying that those are crucial points of emphases. So then, to apply that argument to Do the Right Thing, you need to take that 3-part thesis, which clearly breaks down into 3 specific statements, and then apply each one to Do the Right Thing, which is broadly hailed as not only Spike Lee's breakthrough feature film, but to date, probably still his most important work. Remember that when you're taking an exam like this, when you're writing in the context of an academic environment, we're not just looking for your opinion. What we're looking for is something that Mikhail Bakhtin called heteroglossia, that language is not homoglossia, just one. If it were just homoglossia, then I would tell you what to do and you would do it. If your anatomy class, your professor doesn't want you to use critical thinking and come up with new names for things, right? There's 206 bones in the body. You need to know the name of each bone. You need to know the names of the systems, the relationship between cells and tissues and organs and systems. I don't want my nurse offering her opinion, right? But in critical thinking in the humanities, what's both ours and somebody else's. So we've got Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, and then we have Sterrett's book about Spike Lee's films. And we want to apply we want to apply Sterrett's argument regarding Spike Lee's films to Do the Right Thing. You need to do it in your own words. But again, it's not just entirely idiosyncratic and individual. Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, like all of his films, has multiple interpretations. But that doesn't mean any interpretation is right. For example, if I were to argue that Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing is an extended metaphor for the suppression of Native Americans in the 18th and 19th century in the United States, I'd be wrong. There's no evidence to support that interpretation. So you need to choose moments in the film that support Sterrett's three-part thesis, and you're going to start by going to page 8. Question 2, what social relations does Jungle Fever engage, and how does the film resolve the challenges those relations pose? Obviously, this is about interracial relationships, specifically sexual relationships, complicated by the way in which the ethnicity and family identity of the lead female character engages in not just subjugating her because she's having an illicit affair, but because specifically it's with a black man. So it's written through with racism and also with physical violence against her. Wesley Snipes, on the other hand, faces a different set of challenges with regard to his own married relationship and his election to participate in infidelity. The film resolves those challenges by privileging specifically the black family and the importance of long-standing racial familial bonds, even as they are unsettled and unsettling. We've got the accompanying sociological article, which gives us an empirical basis in actuality, not about fiction. But we can see in this film a, albeit fictional, but very nuanced portrayal of what an interracial relationship is like. Now, obviously, that's more than 2 or 3 sentences, but if you nail interracial relationship, infidelity, black family, and not only racial but ethnic difference, then you've done the job. Question 3. Do the Right Thing maintains roughly Aristotelian conventions of time and space, taking place over a few city blocks over 24 hours. Which of our class films departs from this convention most completely, and what does the broader setting allow? So you don't need to know what Aristotelian conventions of time and space are, but you could just Google it, because that was one of the instructions. You can use the books, you can have the internet open, great. Consistent of time and space, Aristotle argued that a drama should not cover more of a spatial setting than one place, and no more time than the time to watch the play. Obviously, almost no one follows this in film. There's a handful that do. Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, the experimental film Russian Ark. There's a Johnny Depp film, I think might be called Out of Time or something. Nevertheless, not important. So you point out, Do the Right Thing takes place over 24 hours, covering a few city blocks. The film that departs most clearly from that, Mo' Better Blues. We see the main character as a child, playing music. We see that child as an adult, playing music. And then we see that adult no longer capable of playing, but welcoming his son, a young black boy, to play music. So clearly that is a generational span. It also, and this is separate, fulfills one of the definitions of narrative, which is repetition and difference. So we start in one place and we end in the very same place we started, seeing it again for the very first time. That's a paraphrase of T.S. Eliot. That's extra. Here we go. One definition of narrative is the relation of time, space, and causality, while another is difference and repetition in story. How does one of these definitions, or both, apply to Mo' Better Blues? Hey, same answer. Though we could also, of course, apply it to Do the Right Thing, insofar as the film begins with Samuel Jackson's character starting the morning radio show, and the film ends precisely there. Only the ensuing 24 hours have been tremendously impactful on the entire neighborhood. With Mo' Better Blues, we begin with a young black boy with a challenged relationship to both his passion, music, and his family, specifically his father. We end with that boy transformed to a man and transformed as a man, capable of nurturing his son. Question 5. Based on the films and interviews, how would you describe Spike Lee's portrayal of male and female characters? In the assigned interviews, he's very clear, Spike Lee is, that that She's Gotta Have It is a bit of a problem, that he's not experienced enough, and he feels that his portrayal of female characters can be inadequate. In Do the Right Thing, the Rosie Perez character, while the opening expressive, spectacular dance sequence to the song's leitmotif, Fight the Power, she embodies physical power and beauty. However, in the context of the storytelling, she's marginalized by her sometime lover and father of their child, and she's certainly offered, in a sexual way, a way for us in the audience to look at her body, but it seems it's certainly more respectful than what Lee has acknowledged is the case in She's Gotta Have It. Starrett makes the same observations, that Spike Lee has had to grow into a position where he could represent especially strong black women with nuance. Even in Do the Right Thing, Mother Sister is an angel. And the character played by Spike Lee's sister Joy Lee, is an angel. And so that leaves scarce room for variation, whereas think of Spike Lee's male characters throughout Do the Right Thing, and even in just Do the Right Thing and Mo' Better Blues, they come in a variety of types and behaviors and personalities. They're not just good or bad. They're round characters. They feature lots of characteristics that we could tag as good or bad. They complete actions and face consequences. For those of you who don't know, in the background of She's Gotta Have It, the main character Nola has 3 boyfriends who all represent very different types. And some of those types can be mapped from variations of the Buck character from Donald Bogle's book about the negative stereotypes of African Americans in much of 20th century film. But again, 2 to 3 sentences. Spike Lee provides significant variation among male characters in his early films. For example, Da Mayor, Buggin' Out, Mookie, and Radio Raheem all have very different personalities and can be described in terms both positive and negative, period. Nola Darling in She's Gotta Have It seems especially limited to her sexual life from the title alone. And in Do the Right Thing, he expands his palette somewhat, but the female characters seem to either be sexualized or perfect embodiments of gentle femininity. Question 6. Which actors play Mother Sister and Da Mayor? Look at their filmographies on IMDb. What is the likely explanation for their roles in the film? Well, a filmography, a list of the films they've been in, indicates that Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis have decades and decades of acting experience. So Spike Lee and his casting director obviously deliberately chose them to be the sort of older generation, even a sort of grandparent level generation, that serve as these older observers to what is otherwise a relatively young audience, with the exception of Aiello's character, Danny Aiello's character, the owner of the pizza joint. So they're not just the older generation distantly overseeing their neighborhood, they're also an older generation of African American actors being recuperated and brought back to a contemporary film. While DeMeyer seems pretty useless until he saves the boy and saves Mother's sister, it's worth to know, and this wouldn't include in your answer, but Ossie Davis gives the eulogy for Malcolm X in the film Malcolm X that we're going to see next. Now, of course, if you nailed the first 6 questions, you can skip this one. Question 7, what does Bogle describe as the dominant stereotypes of African Americans in film, and how does Spike Lee address or challenge those stereotypes? Well, I never remember all of the terrible stereotypes in order. Recognize he's not offering them, without critique. He's offering them with a significant critique, pointing out that these are radical reductions of African American male and female life. But Toms, Coons, Mammies, and I forget the other one right now. So we've got the older caretaker black woman, the mistress maid in Gone with the Wind is the first, I believe, African-American woman to win a Best Supporting Actress award. I think Hattie McDowell, but she would be the kind of canonical example of the mammy. The Uncle Tom is the subservient older black man from the titular Uncle Tom's Cabin from the mid-19th century. The Buck, the young, sexually active, physically strong black man. The Coon, the subservient young black, and I think also Mulattoes is in there, the tragic figure of the black woman of mixed race who has the abilities to live a white life, but who is prevented from doing so tragically. So how do these play out? It's easy just by age to see DeMea reflecting the Uncle Tom. However, he's not, right? He's not still attached to the black community very closely insofar as he's got his friends, his peers, but they're functional alcoholics. So, but his initial heroism, saving the boy from traffic, and his final heroism in getting Mother's sister out of the violence of the riot demonstrate that he's not subservient to whiteness. We could see, I suppose, Radio Raheem as a Buck figure insofar as he manifests physical strength. But remember, he demonstrates the challenge between love and hate with his hands as he demonstrates that the constant struggle between love and hate. And also, in the end, he's not the especially physically violent man. That violence is initiated by Aiello's character, and Radio Raheem is subsequently murdered by the police. We could see Joy Lee, I suppose, as the mulatto figure, but she's hardly tragic. She's got a strong intergenerational relationship, and the degree to which she works with mother, sister, and the sort of trope of black women's hair demonstrates a strong affinity with the black community and no sort of urge to whiteness whatsoever. In terms of the sort of criminality of the despicable Coon character, well, in this film, those younger black men whose behavior isn't necessarily sanctioned by the white state, they're fighting for cultural political freedom. The film doesn't make them unambiguously good, certainly. They're certainly ambivalent characters, Buggin' Out most notably. Also most notable that Buggin' Out is literally Italian-American, which makes sense given the larger sort of strains in the film. So again, all you have to do here is list the stereotypes. You can just open up that article from course content and identify what characters in a film or multiple films. You could draw some of the same comparisons in Mo Better Blues and how they mean. Now, if you've read the instructions carefully, you know that last question, you can also see that it's worth 30 points instead of 5, is the essay question, which means not 2 or 3 sentences, but 3 paragraphs of 6 to 8 sentences each. Based on the interviews with Spike Lee, what are his major themes and concerns for his films from 1986 to 1991? Cite specific scenes from 3 different films from this period. Okay, with Spike Lee's interviews, you might focus 1 on gender, 1 on he's not making movies about movies like many of his predecessors did, like Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola. He's making movies about what he knows from the street, what he knows about race. And he's making movies that he knows are explicitly political in their arguments and can be critiqued as such. So it would be easy to choose select scenes. Nola Darling speaking directly to the camera. Now this one is in conversation with another film. It's very similar to the opening of Annie Hall. Yet Annie Hall, while named Annie Hall after the female character, is organized around the main character played by Woody Allen. And it's extremely autobiographical, at least in terms of the neuroses and questions about, male sexuality and the relationship between men and women. You don't need to know any of that. The film's not required other than seeing that opening. But Nola Darling is very clear in articulating her sexual identity and her ownership of her own sexuality. We could cite Do the Right Thing and point out its palette of color is highly expressive. You could also turn to the syllabus and point out that I label the 1986 to 1991 period the period of Spike Lee's expressionism. So the effort to use color to be loud, and if you happen to know this background, you don't have to, but I think it's Russell Simmons who defined the emergence of hip-hop in the 70s into the early 80s as not just sound, but DJ-based rapping, styles of dress, styles of dancing, notably breakdancing, and graffiti. So the graffiti and styles of dress, as well as the rapping, are extremely personally expressive, telling stories, showing colors, being loud. We can identify not only in those characteristics of Do the Right Thing, but also in Mo Better Blues, the expression of sound, albeit not through hip-hop, but through the long-standing tradition of jazz, an original African-American art form. And in Jungle Fever, we can identify Lee's concerns with the complicated nature of male-female relationships and the necessity of forgiveness, and also the recognition that it's not just race, but there's class, and that African-American communities have been riven, torn apart by illegal drugs, something he deliberately leaves out of Do the Right Thing, that he'll make an issue of in Jungle Fever, and it is the dominant strand of plot in what we'll watch later when we see Clockers. So for specific scenes, Rosie O'Donnell dancing at the opening of To Fight the Power, and so we could mention hip-hop, music, rap, expressive dancing. We could mention She's Gotta Have It, the opening, very somber, direct address, black and white, where Nola Darling is directly expressing herself to us. And we could mention the Halle Berry's, really her feature debut in Jungle Fever, playing a crack addict. The second essay question, you could choose one or the other. Based on Sterrett's analysis, what are the dominant trends in Spike Lee's films from 1986 to 1991? Cite specific scenes from 3 different films from this period. And this is an opportunity really to just elaborate upon what you offered in a short answer to, I believe, question 1. What's Sterrett's thesis? What are the dominant trends? So his engagement with African-American experience, his focus on a full range of characters at odds with the existing stereotypes, or even the stereotypes of blaxploitation films of the 1970s. You could also situate it in the context of Oscar Micheaux in the clip and the documentary we've seen of his early 20th century work. Oscar Micheaux knew he was functionally the only black filmmaker distributing feature-length films, basically out of the trunk of his car to any theater that would show them. And he knew then that he needed to participate in the politics of respectability. which means he knew he shouldn't show poor black people on the street, criminals using drugs, that he needed to have his black characters conform to white expectations of propriety. Lee, of course, paints with a much wider palette in the late 20th century. And so we can see him giving, again, these much more nuanced portrayals of characters like the mayor, who's not just a drunk. Recall that the younger generation lambasts the mayor in one scene when they say, "I wouldn't have sat there listening to my screaming child. I would have gone and gotten a job," right? So his self-pitying is undercut by the younger generation saying he should be a more responsible person. And yet the mayor remains a sympathetic and round figure because he saves the boy from traffic and protects mother's sister. We can look at the emphasis on family in both Mo' Better Blues and Jungle Fever, how family's not easy. Heck, we could point out Family and Do the Right Thing as well, and Mookie's, itinerant relationship with his son. So we could point out specific scenes wherein people return to family, people get lost but come back, and that would be true of both Mo' Better Blues and Jungle Fever. So I hope this helps. I have said from the beginning that the function of the course is for you to draw relationships between respond. The idea is don't just write your 150 to 300 words and possibly copy in an image, but to then thereafter read what your classmates have said. Where do your positions, interpretations differ from theirs? Where do they match? These podcasts will try to give you guidance on how to do that successfully and also respond to your questions. It's just not possible for me to respond to everybody's submitted draft. I've got 5 classes, 3 of which are exclusively online, and there are just not enough hours in the day. However, because it takes you 30 seconds to email me something or upload something, and it takes me 30 minutes to look at it. However, if you read the instructions carefully, do the assigned reading, complete the assigned viewing, take detailed notes, then you're likely to succeed. Either you're already succeeding or you'll pivot and you'll begin doing much better now. This is especially true for the scene description and analysis. The assignment is very specific, and yet a lot of you in submitting drafts just kind of heard write about a movie, and that's not what the assignment is at all. So you need to go back to the syllabus and read the assignment very carefully. It indicates that you should, that it should be description and analysis, 1 page, single-spaced, times 12 Roman. Imagine if you printed it out, you should be able to fold the top down to the bottom to the edge, crease at the bend, and then that crease should be right about the shift between your description and your analysis. Your description should feature as many film terms as possible as included in our syllabus, the film glossary. So shot, cut, 1 shot, 2 shot, extreme long shot, medium shot, close-up, extreme close-up, pan, track, alienation effect, continuity editing. How lengthy are the shots? How does the camera move within that shot? How many characters are in the shot? Then the cut. What's the relationship of one shot to the next? You're also supposed to, in just 2 or 3 sentences, 2 or 3 lines really, identify the film, the director, year of release, and the overall plot, then get us to a particular scene. So, for example, Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, open parentheses 1989, chronicles a day during a hot summer in Brooklyn, focusing on the physical heat is matched by rising social and racial tensions in the neighborhood, erupting in the end with the death of a young black man at the hands of the police and a subsequent riot. In one particularly important scene, and that's when you lead us into the one scene you've chosen to focus on, in your analysis, you need to return to that scene and say what it means. This is the difference between explicit meaning. Anybody who watches the movie is going to come away with that plot summary. The analysis is more implicit meaning. So it doesn't say in the opening sequence of Rosie Perez Dancing that this is an expression of female physical strength and power wedded to conventional attractiveness, and that to be a black person in the world is to always already be in a fight. The film doesn't say that literally, but it does say fight the power. So the use of that song and the incredibly athletic dancing that's also divorced from conventional reality. People don't typically dress up in boxing gear and hip-hop dance in the street by themselves. So it's clearly divorced from a conventional reality and instead is deliberately expressive in its tone. You also need to quote from one of our books and compare the scene to one of our other films. And this is all in the assignment. So the assignment is the question to which your scene description analysis is the answer. Again, the folks who have done successfully on the midterm and the scene description analysis have either had a class with me before or have called me and have asked for, clearer explanation one-on-one. I've also, of course, included examples of sample scene description and analyses. You do not want to reinvent the wheel. You kind of want to just do your scene description analysis like the ones that I've posted. So, again, you're welcome to revise the scene description and analyses. I will respond to drafts to the extent that I am capable, but I am not capable of responding to every draft from all students in all 5 of my classes. There's just not enough hours in the day. I really enjoy speaking with you. I hope these podcasts are useful for you. The YouTube version that I post, if you have a smartphone with YouTube loaded, you can just play those as you run errands, drive wherever you're going, sitting at home. I want it to be easy, but I also want it to be more kind of human, what teachers call a high-touch environment. I did not get in this business in order to build web pages and write email. So I'm doing the best I can to try to manufacture that experience without working 80 hours a week commenting on drafts. So hopefully this podcast will be useful for many of you as you decide if you're going to, again, revise your scene description analysis, and as you decide whether you want to take another midterm or if you want to just count on the final exam covering the final grade contribution for both exams. Okay, I am now done, and I hope you are not mind-numbingly bored, and I'll sign out and see you later. Enjoy Malcolm X.